And I was thinking that one of the really interesting analogies in the Prestige is the idea that the audience is looking for an accident, you know? And it's that the audience wants to believe, they want to believe in something that's not there. And that's why they refuse to face the reality, which is that they're complicit in this act of misery and suffering that's put on for their own good. And, I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, that actually is crypto, because we've got people who have this libertarian mind, like they want the world to be gold bug and they want Bitcoin to work. And so they're willing to believe this kind of magical thoughts about how economics must work, which, like, you look at the market and that's not how it works at all, but they want to believe so badly that they'll suspend disbelief at the magic show, to the point that when the bad things start happening, they go like, well,
they can't see it, they can't hear it.
Yeah. And I knew you got it when you used the word elegant, because that's the word that people use, because they realize, wait a minute, there's like, at the tech side, we've got like signatures and stuff is sent along and people go, oh my gosh, this is, it's complicated. It's more, and it's like, no, it's really, really simple.
When you zoom out.
We want to pay you for bringing money in and giving it to other people. And that's what you do. And all of the other complexities that are kind of hid beneath the ideology go away, because we don't need that ideology, because the incentives actually line up, But anyway, I steered clear of that because I was like, what people need is a basic introduction to what's happening, not my thoughts on crypto ideology,
I thought it was pretty funny because the simple analogy for Saito would be Inception. And I thought to myself, I was like, chuckling. Well, if Inception is the simple version, then
I mean, but it's true. Like, we look at the distributed systems people, and people. I think on the chat there was a guy today who's like, let's get some more peer review, and it's like, yes, please, let's get more peer review. Like, we have a hell of a time with it because the computer scientists, they have no clue. And it's because they're approaching it as this outgrowth. Like, a lot of people don't know that, Leslie Lamport?
No.
So he solved the Byzantine generals problem in 1982.
Okay.
So a lot of people, they're like, oh, Satoshi solved the Byzantine generals problem. And it's like, well, that problem was already solved. What's new about Satoshi's solution is that it's open. So the proof of stake, the validator solutions, where you have people validating blocks, and when you've got a certain amount of them, you're good. That's building from Leslie Lamport. They're kind of taking his solution and then they're wrapping it around this kind of voting mechanism with tokens. But for us, it's a real challenge, because the computer scientists, they don't get the economic part. They've kind of forgotten that. They're just like, how do we achieve consensus? And they don't even realize that the point is you've got a network that pays for itself, because if you don't have that, you don't have, like, just go back to Amazon. So
this would probably go back into another discussion about the fact that everyone has to be an expert. And if you're a polymath, you're of no worth because you're not serious about your studies. And I think there was this philosopher that said that an expert is someone that knows more and more about less and less. Eventually, they will know everything about nothing.
Well, they'll know a lot about validators, But yeah, we use if you've seen the Inception video, we use anamnesis. And one of the crazy things, what a great film. The other advantage is we get to talk about Nolan a lot, but it's true that people have forgotten the point of what a blockchain is supposed to be. And it's turned into, oh, it's a machine that tracks consensus. And it's like, look, you put an owner on top of a database and you've now got a system that can track consensus, and it scales beautifully. It's the openness and the self-supporting aspect, because that's what makes it trustless. And people forget that. They turned it into a technical problem, and then, in order to scale up the technical problem, they sacrifice.
You have to build stuff on top of it, and
yeah. And I think, again, this is where, like, the ideology gets in the way, because the things people have to believe, like Satoshi. If you look at the model economically is that miners, if you can scale, it's because miners will pay for the network, because that's what makes money. And so the model assumes that miners will be the economic actors who decide what needs to happen. And that's where it falls apart economically, because that's like a really naive view of economics. You know, in the 1960s, mainstream, you know, economics moved away from that, and we had public choice theory and the prisoner's dilemma and chicken. And no one seriously by the 70s could say that we're going to end up in the best of all possible worlds because we've got a free market. People would have to say, well, you got to look at the incentives, and that tells you if we end up in the good space or the bad space.
I'm wondering something, because I heard, you know, like I watched the whiteboard session you did with Ilya, and at one point you mentioned that Saito could run the peer-to-peer network for Bitcoin.
Why not?
Could that be a possibility, to like plug Bitcoin into Saito and use it to?
Sure. I mean, here's the thing. It's like we're paying for fee collection, right? So the mechanism gives you money if you can convince someone to give you a transaction. And if you want to get paid more, you have to do one of two things. You have to convince them to give you more money, or you have to do a more efficient job routing it into blocks. So you can work on optimizing the network, and you can be the outside node, and you can like skip this guy and go directly to this guy. You can like upgrade your co-location facilities and kind of work to get a more optimized network backbone.
And this would be in the real world. This would be infrastructure.
For sure, right? Like, you know, get a faster pipe across the Pacific. That, you know, we need that. So you could do that. But the second thing you can do is you could say, well, I'm just going to make them pay me more money to connect to my node. And the question then is, well, why are they going to pay you more money to connect to your node? And the answer is because you're doing something extra for them. And you might remember the debates about like, well, how do you build an ASIC that people can't game? And the Sato's it.
Because network is the ASIC.
Exactly. Fee collection is the ASIC. And what happens is you can't game it, because if there's too much competition, like if everyone is providing the same set of services, the marginal value and the marginal utility to the fee paying customer is really low, because they can get that anywhere. Like with Saito, if you just want your transaction on the blockchain, you're going to be able to pay a lowball fee and get it to 1 or 2 hops in.
Right.
And then it's just going to sit there until that guy produces a block. So if it's not urgent, if it's not urgent, that's fine. And you're going to save money. If it's super urgent, pay a really high fee, and then the economics are going to push it out to everyone. But, you know, to go back to the Bitcoin analogy, well, like payment SIGs and routing channels and stuff, the problem is connecting the two players. And that's why that's one of the points of a blockchain, is that it's universal broadcast. And so people say like, oh, layer 2, whatever. And it's like, well, layer 2 is not universal broadcast. So you could do things like in Saito, what delivers value? Well, and this is where kind of what we're doing with the Web3 Foundation and DOT comes in. Well, one of the things you can do to contribute value is you can run infrastructure for something that someone cares about that connects to the services on your Saito node. And you kind of use that Saito node to control access to it. So you run a DOT parachain node, or you run an Infura Ethereum kind of node, and then the Saito applications you're serving, you'll give that data to your users because, well, you're forcing them to pay a higher fee because you're the only one that's got it.
You have a better product and you can charge for it.
Right. So like running, you know, obviously, Saito, we need to fund our own infrastructure, but there's no reason we can't fund any infrastructure that doesn't contribute value. And that's why I think the big question is like, we don't know what it looks like, because we don't know at maximum scale really how big can this get. And we also don't know like how much are people going to be paying in fees every month. If it's not a huge network, you could have a bunch of specialized niche applications, and maybe I'm making $50 in payments. And the advertising thing is feeding tokens to me. If we get global, it could just be we're doing global key exchanges, kind of like SSL connections with you and your bank, where when your computer joins the network, it sends a little ping if the IP address has changed. And what you're really doing is you're saying, anyone who wants to know where I am, because this is my private key, I'm at this IP address now. And then everyone else in the world who wants to connect with you and do cryptographic stuff can ping you off chain. And well, they know your key, so you can securely communicate with them, and there's no man in the middle stuff, because people, you'll know.
Okay. You basically you identify yourself and create that, well, how could I put it, like a proof of identity, and then you can go off chain and do your transactions in your business, whatever you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Saito's a network, it's a tool. We're not telling people how to use it. We don't really know. We don't, usage drives up fees and fees drive down usage. The point is that we've got an economic system where it will work at whatever level of scale we can achieve, and the pricing will drive it to that. What we don't know is at that, what am I paying per month? Because maybe it's a super massive network and we're doing global SSL stuff and I'm paying 50 cents a month to use it. I'm not going to get free internet off chain for that. No. I might get like a little bit of liquidity in a Bitcoin Lightning Network channel, but that's cool because that's something Bitcoin can't pay for. Lightning Network can't pay for it. So if we can do that, that's super cool. Maybe I get a free GitHub account if I'm a developer, or someone archives transaction messages for me so that it's kind of like Gmail. When I log in, I hit up their transaction archive and they say, here are your last 100 inbound transactions. You can populate the forum or chat or email or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's what's of value to the user. And again, it's like the network doesn't need to do this because it's kind of like Bitcoin and hash, where the miners show up with a hash and we assume that they've done the mining work. Well, if you show up with the fee, we can assume you've done something to earn it in a competitive network, because at scale, if someone's offering, you're going to have to offer someone at least a reasonable rate, because if you don't, you're going to go out of business because someone's going to drive you out. So yeah, I think you get it,
I get parts of it. I'm not going to lie. But I was because we're drifting into all these technical aspects. But here I was wondering, because you talked about how Saito could be used for email, you said, and GitHub account. You gave another example. Like, what are some of the uses that are possible with Saito that cannot be done on other blockchains?
Well, I think most of the things that Saito can do can be done on other blockchains. And that's from identifying what a blockchain is. A blockchain fundamentally is a PKI network, public key cryptography. So everyone's got a private key and you've got a public key. And you are identified by your public key. So any network that gives you that is going to be able to do some of this stuff. So the question is, well, what's special about Saito? And the answer is it's permissionless and it's open. And that means that nobody can coerce you into their business model, and you're going to get the lowest price for the operating costs of the network, given that it's open.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a Windows versus Linux thing. And so I think one of the challenges people have is they kind of take a look at what they're doing and they say, like, well, you're doing email on a blockchain. It's like, well, no. We're demonstrating to you how you can build applications that run on a blockchain that don't need smart contracts. Because one of the things we've learned is when you go to someone, you say, look, we're an application blockchain. People say, oh, where's the EVM? Because they're thinking you must be Ethereum. And we're saying, well, no, you don't need that. That's a layer 2 application. The layer 1 application is you've got this key that you can use to sign stuff, and we can do a lot of stuff just with that. Like in the Web3 gaming stuff, where you're using your cryptographic keys to shuffle a deck of cards or roll dice, and it's secure and it's provably fair. So, any PKI network can do it. The real question is, why do we want openness? And you want openness because it's a network effect. You're going to have the lowest per byte cost. And again, that's basically like, well, okay, if you want this, which consensus mechanism do you want powering it? And we think you want the one that's the most secure at the lowest cost, and that's Saito. Because proof of work, proof of stake, it's 51% of tax. So if you burn $1 in fees, you basically get 50 cents of security. With Saito, if you understand the mechanism, or as people do, they realize that it is at minimum 100%. And with the staking system that's in the advanced section, we get it up to about 125 to 150 now, which means that every dollar that the network is processing in fees, the attacker has to spend up to $1.50 to attack the network. So you want high security, but you also want what Saito does, which is you want that security to come from the stuff you have to pay for. Because every PKI network, they've got to pay for servers, and you've got to pay for bandwidth. And that's why you want this consensus mechanism, because we're getting security from it. And that's also, if you think about it, it's why like Vitalic's scalability trilemma just doesn't apply. Because we're getting security from routing. So if you pay more for routing, like you get more security too. You're not trapped in this trade-off where the money that you spend on the peer-to-peer network lowers your security. But this is maybe getting a bit technical.
You think so? Yeah.
I mean, it's economics, right? It's cost. It's like we're selling data, and we're selling universal broadcast on a blockchain with a quantifiable amount of economic security. And the question is, do you want to pay $80,000 for it on Bitcoin, or do you want to pay $20,000 for it on Saito? And I think for scalable usage, it's going to be lowest cost per byte. And that's the real game that I think will happen in the next 5 years.
Speaking of on the same topic, you mentioned somewhere that Saito is the most scalable solution that exists to this day.
We believe so, yes, absolutely.
And I was thinking because Solana claims to have something like 65,000 transactions per second at a cost of 0.002 cents.
Yeah.
And I presume Saito is still an order of magnitude from that.
Let me rephrase it. We think that the transaction per second metric is total bullshit. And here's why. Everyone is we're dealing with moving bytes around. And there's a lot of people, and they're trying to manipulate it. So you go, oh, we've got layer 2, and layer 2 does this throughput. Where Ethereum's like, oh, we've got zero knowledge proofs. And it's like, okay, look, yeah, you can put layer 2 on pretty much any network. And as soon as you go to layer 2, you're going to lose a lot of properties. You lose, for instance, the property of universal broadcast. Okay.
Okay. So when you get layer 2, you lose universal broadcast.
You lose properties.
Yeah.
And you lose important properties. And that doesn't mean that what you're getting is bad, right? Like, we could have Amazon coin. Amazon could set up a Bitcoin node. It could set up a Saito node. It could be the only one you ever connect to. And you never connect, they don't let anyone else on the network. It's a permissioned network, which would be like what? It would be like the Apple App Store, right? When you're publishing applications, you're signing them with a cryptographic key. And then Apple signs it with their cryptographic key. And well, if it's signed with both, your laptop will run it because it'll be like, hey, this application's safe. It's signed by Apple. PKI network. Now, that's not trustless. One of the key things that people forget often is they forget that, like, well, why is Bitcoin new and exciting? And people think, oh, it's because it's digital money. And it's like, no, we had digital money before. And they're like, oh, it's a PKI network. It's like PKI networks were invented. PKI cryptography goes way back. We had commercial PKI networks in the 1990s. What was new about Bitcoin is that the network paid for itself. And if someone dropped out, someone else is supposed to have a financial incentive to come in. So the key innovation is that you can't shut this thing down because it's paying for itself. And Satoshi's insight was actually, if you think about it economically, it's like, well, for the network to pay for itself, it needs to be a kind of money. But if it's a kind of money, we can use it to pay for itself. So it's kind of like this double leap forward where we go from not being able to do things to being able to have a form of money because we can use this form of money to pay for ourselves. And I'm just going to shut down Telegram here. So your question was about, I think, transactions per second and scalability.
Yeah.
Right. And there are lots of ways to gain those metrics. You can see things like often one of is, okay, well, we go to layer 2 and then we can do all kinds of nonsense off chain. Doesn't have the properties of the blockchain, but we're saying, oh, well, we're making this number of payments. DAGs, for instance, are a really good case. Like if you're making a payment on a DAG chain, there's no guarantee that anyone else on the DAG chain is going to get that data. So you're not going to use a DAG for universal broadcast. Like you're not going to publish your IP address onto the DAG and say, well, now everyone's going to get this, because that's not what the infrastructure is for.
So basically, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to finish up quickly. Like we can go on about Saito. So, the layer 2 stuff, we're losing properties. The people who were doing layer 1 scalable stuff, one of the things that happens is if you want to scale, you have to add closure. So on economics, it's a weird informational symmetry to the economic problem, because the economic problem is if you don't have closure around a source of money, people are going to bleed off that source of money and you can have economic attacks. On the informational basis is that if you really want to make things efficient, you need to have closure too, because if you've got 100 validators, 100 computers in the system, well, you can get up to a certain speed and you can have blocks being produced in a certain order round robin, and that lets you speed things up, because the fact that the system's not open means you don't have these inefficiencies that come from people broadcasting blocks from here or there or somewhere else. So
if I'm getting this correctly, you're sacrificing the very thing to get some transaction performance that would not be possible if the system would continue to be permissionless and open. So you're basically you're closing it in order to get performance.
It's the Saito message. We're maximalists. We chat with Bitcoin. You guys think, people think Bitcoiners are maximalist. Like, no man, Saitos are maximalists because we don't want closure. And the reason we don't want closure is because there's about 20,000 ways of achieving it. But they all kind of theoretically lead you to the same place, which is that you end up with a permission network. And you either get that permission network on the tech level, where you get things like, and you can think about proof of stake, what they've done is they've closed off the network. And they're saying, okay, well, we're only going to have like 30 nodes producing blocks, and we're going to round robin this. And that's fantastic. It's going to be faster. We're going to get block times, further down. And so they close it off and they're like, oh, finality, all of these wonderful tech things. What they've done is they've moved the 50% attack to the open mechanism that's outside, where they have a voter selection, a validator selection mechanism. And, moving the vulnerability doesn't solve it. And it's kind of a way, to a Saito maximalist, it's a way of avoiding talking about what the problem actually is, because the market's, you're not going to fool the market. If you can make money attacking the voting system, you're still incentivizing attacks on the system. But what you'll see people do is they'll say things like, oh, look, because we've got a closed validator set, we've got finality. Great, we've solved the double spending problem. And it's like, no, you haven't. You've just moved it. And you've maybe solved something here by creating another problem that's symmetrical there. So it's kind of like when you get that
whack-a-mole. You hit it here, it pops up in a different.
Yes. Like Omri Sechet, who's got, I think, conceptually, like with BCH, he's having issues funding it. Go figure, But it's kind of like that bubble under your phone screen. You can push it up here or you can push it over there. It's still there. Yeah. And, to answer your question, it's not like this stuff isn't useful. So if people want to use Avalanche, if they want to use the DAGs, if they want to use Ethereum, it's not like this stuff's not valuable, but it's not pure, and it's not pure openness. And that's a very, very fragile creature, and it gets damaged very easily. So what we're doing with Saito is we're being maximalist about it. We do not want to sacrifice that, and we're refusing to. And the economic design of Saito is We're not going to sacrifice this. So when people talk about like TPS, it's kind of like, well, okay, we can talk about this, but if you're going to tell me your numbers and you're going to talk about layer 2 and you're going to do this, we've got to actually have a conversation about what you've lost in the process. And what always happens when they scale things up is you lose openness and you lose the fundamental properties of trustlessness that are why we're using a blockchain in the first place. Because, I had a call with Michael from Box Mining once, and we went into Saito, and he loved it. But so we're a small network, we're young, and so he kind of pulls me back at one point. He says, "Well, yeah, but Ethereum is worth a lot of money, and Bitcoin's worth a lot of money." And I basically took him and I said, "Come on, Michael, the value of that network is because people are using it."
Exactly.
Now, if you agree with me that they're going to become permission networks, either from the technical design that they are embracing, and that's Ethereum. Like they're embracing closure and they're using this narrative of the scalability of trilemma and trade-off to say, well, we can't not do it. So we're just going to be the smartest people and we decide what the trade-offs are, and the trade-offs line their own pocket. But we say, well, look, why is the market going to use Ethereum and why is it going to use Bitcoin? Why is it going to use a permissioned network at scale? Because people have to pay fees. And why am I paying fees for this thing if it's basically the same as Amazon Coin? And so with Saito, one of the challenges is people say, well, we're using Saito for apps. What can Saito do that other chains don't do? That's a really interesting question. And I don't think we really know the answer. What we do know is that Saito class networks are going to be pure and they're going to be different. And we're going to find out. It's kind of like a Linux versus Windows, what is Linux going to do that Windows can't? Well, it turns out a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, so I guess in essence, you could say that Ethereum, for example, has just the remains of it is just a shell of the actual idea that started it. The whole idea of having a permissionless network and not being same with Bitcoin, not being validated by any one entity, right? I mean, that was the whole point of it, that you couldn't be censored. And now all of a sudden you're just going back into it. So it's kind of like a bait and switch, doesn't it? It feels a bit like that.
Yeah, I mean, and but it's useful, right? Like MetaMask connects to Infura, it's useful. Like, is it open enough? Like, this is the real world. It's not like these networks aren't going to have usage. And, degrees of gray, like we're not saying Ethereum's going to go away. I think the really interesting thing with Ethereum is, when people understand what we're saying about the economics of blockchain, they realize that actually, like Vitalic called me a BSV shill at one point because he didn't understand what I was saying. I was saying you need to fix the incentives to scale. And we're actually pointing out that BTC, the classic Bitcoin, is the original design that works because it has the volunteer network. Now, there are economic problems with that because if you can't grow fee throughput, you're toast, because you've got the block reward that's subsidizing mining. Hash power is becoming a commodity. Eventually, Bitcoin has a lot of real issues. Ethereum, but if you've got that volunteer network, well, the economics work because it's not market driven, right? Like, when you've got volunteers, you've got someone who's willing to spend money doing the stuff that the network can't incentivize, and they don't really care if miners are making a bit of that cash.
But you can't have volunteers if the network grows to the point where it takes over the world, because nobody's going to volunteer to process all of that.
With Ethereum, Joe Lubin is volunteering, and that's what we're seeing right now. What we're seeing is the bigger scalable networks have commercial incentives to do it that are not sustainable, but that are based on people trying to create moats and competitive advantages. So, Joe Lubin, why is he funding Infura through consensus? Well, when last time Richard and I were at the Stanford Blockchain Conference, the hot gossip was that Infura was processing like 80 to 90% of the transactions that were coming into the network. And it's like, well, that's game over as soon as Infura decides to stop giving the money away to people. So, Infura is a volunteer. And, the people are saying, oh, look, no, it's good. The private sector is stepping in and it's going to run servers. And you got to think, well, no, it's losing money when they actually need to make money.
Could it be, sorry for interrupting, could it be that they're doing the same thing that Facebook was doing in the beginning in order to gain users? Like no ads, no nothing, no just, it's just, use it. We're losing money. Same as Amazon, lose money, gain the users. And then once you have the users, once they're locked in, then you start charging them.
Well, I mean, another way to think of it is anytime a blockchain is supposed to be open. So what's the thing that Infura is supposed to do that it's not going to be doing? It's not going to be spending a lot of money to collect money for the network and just giving it out to other people. And the reason it's not going to do that is that never happens in a free market, because and it's crazy to have to say this, but this is where like that ideology just masks in, where people will say, well, of course someone's going to do it, because if people don't do it, then the network doesn't work. And you look at them and you got to be like, yeah, okay, so I understand you see there are these two equilibrium and two possibilities. Why do you think the one where the network works is the one that we end up in? Because economists are going to say, actually, the market failure is the one we end up in, because no one is, as soon as someone, they think the incentive is, they think the question they're trying to answer is, what possible incentive could someone have to run a server? And then their answer is, oh, well, Infura can make money. Or I'm going to turn into Facebook and I'm going to make money as this middleman. They don't realize the actual question is, if somebody else is collecting and sharing transactions and fees and money and data that's of value, because it's not just the inbound fees, it's also all of the consensus information. If someone else is doing that, why will you pay to do it too? Because you get it for free from me. This is the free rider problem, okay? So and we can see this in Ethereum.
Oh, you mean like, why would I also pay for it when someone else is already paying for it? I can just,
they're giving you a free lunch. They're spending all of this money to collect all of this money and give it to the network.
It makes no sense, no economic sense whatsoever.
Which is exactly what we see in Ethereum. They look at things and they're like, oh my gosh, we have problems paying for expensive servers to support light clients. And their solution is, we're going to make it cheaper for these servers to run and support light clients by putting more load on Infura. And so they do things like, this is where their trade-offs come from. And this is why, when we talked about scalability with Saito, it's why you have to pay for this. Because if you pay for this out of consensus, then by paying for fee collection, one of the things that happens is it becomes economically infeasible to buy and sell transaction flow. So you can't create these strategic monopolies on the network layer, because if I'm buying transaction flow from you, when I get it, it's worth half as much to make a block. And then I don't control who gets paid. So if I use your work to make a block, you're going to get the money anyway. So what am I paying you? And if I pay you anything, I'm going to lose money.
You're basically forced to play by the rules. If you wanna, if you're an honest participant in the market, it will work. If you do the work, it will work. Right. If you're trying to game the system, it's not going to work.
You got it. Why am I going to, if I want to attack the network, I'm not going to buy fees from you because they're useless to me. I'm going to spend my own money directly because that's the most efficient way of attacking the network. And if I buy fees from you, well, I'm sure you'll be happy with that. That's fine. You're paying money to other people in the network. That's what Saito actually incentivizes. The way to get paid is you've got to pay other people. And it's really kind of mind blowing, because people have never, if you think about it on the most abstract level, it makes sense. If you get paid to pay people money, you're profitable if you're paying people with money someone else has given you. But if you attack the network, well, no one's giving you money, so you've got to spend it out of pocket. So on a non-technical level, it makes sense when people get it and they go, okay, well, yeah, that's simple.
It could be like Saito. You got to spend money to make money.
Yeah. And, you know, and you gotta, the only way to get money that's not expensive is if it's coming from users. And so it all wraps together. It really wraps together beautifully. And, you know, like you said, maybe the way to do it is I run this dot parachain because people want to play poker with this parachain poker token. Maybe I run Lightning Network channels because the BTC people are coming to use my Saito node. You know, what can I do to convince you to use my Saito node? Well, maybe I code an app. I'm the only one that's got this game. You got to use me.
Speaking of that, I mean, maybe you're not allowed to talk about this, but how's the mainnet coming along? When is that planned for launch? Do you have anything to announce on that part?
I mean, we try to get away from the words mainnet because I think.
Sorry.
No. It's not bad. It's more because it's like what people think about. We prefer the kind of Kusama approach, which is we've got something that's working. You can use it. You can deploy applications on it. We're not promising that the tokens you've got on that network aren't going to go away because we're still developing it. But you can use the network. Pardon me. Well, if someone wants to use the network, our servers are pretty much free to access, zero. You don't need to even include a fee. And we can send you some tokens to develop, like, you know, whatever. At some point, we're going to flick a switch and we're going to start making sure that the tokens on this network, if we ever reset it, they get issued right back to those main addresses. And we're going to be in that stage of development for a while, where we're making sure that the tokens that are circulating on mainnet, you know, economic policy is great. The Rust client and the JavaScript client are fighting. If we need to make protocol changes for scale, or because someone comes up with an absolutely brilliant idea, we can do that. And, you know, if at that point, if we reset the network, it's a fork. And so it's like, well, will the community follow us? At some point, maybe we're like, this is a great idea. And the community says, guys, what are you talking? We think that's crazy. We're going to stick with what we've got, which is fine. It's a public network. But what's going to happen is we're getting the Rust client under development. I think it'll be reasonably good in about 6 months. We're going to get it up, and one day people are going to wake up and Sato's in mainnet, and it's been in mainnet for 6 months. And one of the strategic challenges for us is, given that this is how the network has to develop, how do we accomplish the other goals that we have, such as getting people to know about Saito, getting people to build applications, getting people to understand it. And so like the IDO and the ERC wraps 20 token, that's kind of part of that. And I think people can look at the roadmap and it makes more sense if you think of us as this kind of network. Does that answer your question?
To some extent, yes. I was just wondering because I'm thinking that I haven't seen this before, but I think Saito is the first blockchain, and in a way, it feels wrong to call it a blockchain because it feels so different. But at the same time, it has to share the name with, you know, all the other kids, you know.
We do have blocks, you know.
Yeah, I guess you could resume it to that. But I'm saying, like, you don't have wallets, if I'm correct.
We do. Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the arcade, for instance, you know how there's this little hamburger menu there.
Yeah.
If you click on that, you'll see your address. You can go to the wallet that's down below. The wallet's just an application. That's the thing that looks like Gmail. You can back up your keys. You can re-import them.
But I mean, it's all built into the web page. It's not an add-on or anything like that.
Well, I mean, it's theoretically a wallet. What we've got with the in-browser stuff, the reason, if you've got a lot of money in your wallet, you're not going to want to keep it in Chrome in memory, which is basically what's happening. So, you know, if you purge your browser cache, you lose your wallet. Okay, so back it up. Transient wallets that are going to have like 5 cents in them or 10 cents in them, that's fine. So maybe, you know, the Saito arcade, I'm going to have 10 cents in that wallet. You know, the wallet gets reset. Who cares? I've got a new transient one and, you know, I'm going to get another 5-10 cents in. That's fine. There are vulnerabilities to this approach, which is that whenever I join the site, whoever's feeding me JavaScript has the potential to attack me because they could feed me bad code. So Sato's designed so that, well, you don't need that. You could have an Electron app which stores that light client code, that stores your wallet. You download it once and it's like a desktop app. You know, it's a browser, but you only download your wallet that once. And when you download it that once, that's where you face the vulnerability that someone's feeding you bad software.
During that download.
Yeah, so, you know, you might, you know, you can use that approach too. The reason that we are focusing on the in-browser stuff is if you want to get people using blockchain apps, you have to make it super easy. And we think the age of people downloading a wallet and going to an exchange and buying tokens, moving the tokens into this Electron app, just so that they can see if what you're doing is remotely interesting, we think that died in 2016. And so for most people, we want to start them with, look, you got a transient wallet. We're going to give you a little bit of small change so that you can start playing around with it. And when people want the financial security of, oh my God, I've got a bunch of tokens. This is worth a decent amount of money. I don't feel safe anymore. Well, then you can shift to this download once, run all the time architecture, which is always open to you. So for us, again, you know, it gets back to strategy. It's how do we get people to know about what we're doing? You know, not all use cases require you to be dealing with wallets with huge amounts of cash. You know,
that's true. I think that's pretty much all the questions I had.
Rant.
Yeah, pretty much.